Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Deal-making under Trump 2.0 is at full speed ahead, with former antitrust Assistant Attorney General Makan Delrahim.
No, the antitrust laws will still be enforced, and in fact will be enforced pretty vigorously.
And protecting our public health, the FDA's top vaccine official resigned, a measles outbreak spreads, and former FDA head Scott Gottlieb says trust in vaccinations is key to our future.
We have to get this outbreak under control within the next 10 months or so to make sure we don't lose our measles elimination status, which could have some profound impacts on advisories related to travel to the United States.
Plus, a commuted sentence for Ozy Media's Carlos Watson, automakers brace for tariffs set to begin this week, and President Trump floats the idea for a third term.
He's never going to do a third term. He's never going to really do tariffs. And here we are in this place where he's talking openly about both.
It's Monday, March 31st. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernen. And check this out, Andrew Ross Sorkin. Welcome back, Andrew.
Back from vacation. Thank you. Nice to see you. I just wanted to be here for Tariff Week. I wanted to make sure that
Liberation
I was here
Liberation Week.
In time for the big news. In time for
Liberation
the market
Day.
to go the other direction.
Yeah. T-Day. I'd been calling it D-Day because I couldn't remember Liberation Day, but T-Day is more appropriate for tariffs.
Does it feel like it's the beginning of the night, or does it feel like it's the beginning of the day?
I was just in Japan, everybody. So does it? I don't know what it feels like. It just I got back 24 hours ago, so I'm still a little bit off.
You were sleeping theoretically during our day over there, weren't you?
It's 12 hours.
I missed the show, if that's what you're asking.
You've got your DVR.
I do, and I've got friends on Twitter.
You do?
Like to tell me what's going on.
You have friends?
I know a surprise.
You got some sun.
I don't know if it may be makeup. I don't know.
Oh, you look relaxed.
Thank you.
Welcome you back.
I don't know if I'm relaxed.
Your friends
this will take your vacation glow away. We're going to jump right into all the news.
They include me. Your friends include, a lot of them include me.
No, you blocked them. So they talk to me. They don't talk to you.
Only blocked 6,000 people. Were they upset about anything last week? They weren't really that upset, were they?
Well, let's start on a great note.
Okay. All right. I can't believe you missed some of that stuff. You missed the signal through the noise.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Right now, as we get ready for that final day of the first quarter, we're going to be taking a look at where things stand. For the quarter to date, you are looking at the Dow off by 2.25%. S&P is down by just over 5%, and the NASDAQ down by about 10.25%. If you are looking at what we've been dealing with from the all-time highs, at least, the Dow is off by about 7.75%, the S&P down by 9.25%, the NASDAQ off by 14.25%. If you're looking at the NASDAQ 100, it's by closer to about 11% down. And take a look at the Magnificent Seven stocks in the first quarter. An article from The Information getting some attention over the weekend. It said that some large companies are finding DeepSeek's AI models can be 95% cheaper to use than OpenAI's. And lower AI costs could pressure Microsoft and other firms to reduce prices. All right, let's take a look at Treasury yields this morning, because as you see this sell-off in equities, you are looking at Treasuries catching a bid. We're looking at lower yields, with the 10-year now at 4.19 and the 2-year at 3.84. Gold prices, by the way, also getting a bid this morning. They are at another record level. And you'll see right now the latest trade for gold prices is, drum roll please.
It's like 3,050, wasn't it?
And those are the Asian markets. We'll take a look at it. I know it's sitting at another record level again this morning, 3,146.
Wow, it is. Yeah.
Meantime, let's tell you about some of the stocks that stumbled because this really tumbled in Asia overnight. Japan's Nikkei, where I just came from, falling 4%, entering correction territory. South Korea's Kospi index closing 3% lower. The market's regulator there ending a ban on short selling that had been in place since November of 2023, if you can believe that, over regulatory concerns. And Hong Kong's Hang Seng now down by more than 1% on the anxiety and nerves around tariffs.
I think it was the PCE, I guess, on Friday. But what maybe is a little surprising is that we were still not in correction territory on the S&P. We got there. for one day. Then we had a good week, I think, for as far as the
You're back at like
tradable
down 5%
bounce.
from a high. Yeah.
Tradable bounce. Given where the S&P has indicated today, that'd be back in correction territory. But we hit it once, and we didn't keep going to down 15 or down 20. We kind of rebounded. Now we're doing it again, but it feels even more painful. New call on the economy from Goldman Sachs. Firm's chief economist, Jan Hatzius, raising Goldman's tariff assumption, its inflation expectations, also lowering its first quarter GDP estimate, and increasing the number of rate cuts it expects in 2025. You could see traders, with all the bad stuff he said, but with an extra rate cut, maybe the market goes up on that. Hatzius said higher tariffs are likely to boost consumer prices. So the firm lifted its year-end core PCE inflation forecast by 0.5 percentage point to 3.5% year over year. When you're trying to get to 2%,
you're not going to see rate cuts.
Right.
If
when you're
that's the
trying to get
case.
to, but he said maybe another one because of the growth concerns, I guess.
All of the pressure you're seeing in futures today, a lot of it tied back, of course, to what President Trump has been saying about tariffs. He now says that every country will face tariffs under his administration. Those new tariffs are expected to go into effect on Wednesday this week. The president making some comments on Air Force One last night as he returned to Washington from Florida.
The tariffs will be far more generous than those countries were to us. They ripped us off like no country's ever been ripped off in history. And we're going to be much nicer than they were to us, but it's substantial money for the country.
You're expecting to hit something like 10 to 15 countries, is that right?
No.
So how many countries will be in that initial tranche?
You'd start with all countries.
Those comments capping a weekend of news about tariffs. The president telling NBC's Kristen Welker that he couldn't care less if foreign car prices go up, since that would make it more likely that Americans would buy American-made cars. Trump also denied having told U.S. auto CEOs not to raise prices. That was the subject of a Wall Street Journal report last week. Also, reports saying that the president is still considering escalating tariff measures and that there's debate in the White House over whether to impose individual tariff rates on countries or an across-the-board rate. One theme permeating a lot of the reporting on tariffs, that perhaps what President Trump is expected to announce on Wednesday is still in flux, even at this moment. But if you looked at the Wall Street Journal last week, remember on Monday last week, every day you can look at something different, but on Monday of last week, the markets were up because the Journal was reporting at that point that it looked like it was going to be much narrower, and maybe we'd be looking at sectors that were facing things and other countries that could get reprieves in some of these issues. It does sound like it's still in flux, but the reporting is coming from people who are leaking their side of what they are trying to convince the president to do.
He was supposedly going to be more lenient, and then this is in the Journal today. Now we're back to, no, we're going to be much tougher than just what they were saying on Thursday or Friday.
If you were trying to raise money
25
so that
on
you can
everyone.
offer tax cuts in other areas, these are going to have to be broader and they're going to have to be permanent tariffs, not things that go away.
Well, you're going to need the permanent tariffs if you actually believe that these companies are going to actually come here and actually really build manufacturing plants. I still think that there's this crazy sort of behavioral science experiment going on, which is if people think that there's a chance that the tariffs come off at any point in the next 3 years or even 5 years, you will play chicken effectively with the system. And so that to me is the whole game. You actually have to say, this is what it is, and we're not moving. The question is, even if he says that, if you believe that there would be a permanent shift in terms of politics in 2 years, in terms of the midterms or later on, that would somehow reverse this, changes the whole thing.
Hey, look, it's complicated for companies because they make billions of dollars in CapEx decisions based on policy. When policy shifts pretty rapidly, that's going to be something that takes time to catch up. But it does sound like President Trump, who will be the one who makes this decision, is leaning towards going bigger on this plan.
And there's been a change. It used to be these are just negotiating tools, probably won't go on. Now it's you got to eat your vegetables. So pick your vegetable that you don't really like. And pick your dessert. I had Brussels sprouts and I had cheesecake for dessert.
Can I ask a question
Eat your vegetables.
to both of you about this? Because on my vacation, I'm thinking a lot about this. And I was thinking about the idea that
kale.
we had so many people who came in here, including people who are now on his cabinet, who said, no, Andrew, stop worrying. This is just a negotiating tool.
Still might be.
Well, but so the question, though, is now you're saying eat your vegetables.
That's what they're saying.
No, I understand that, but how is the American public supposed to think about that? I asked just because I thought about that. By the way, I thought about this. You may think it's unrelated, but in the same context, over the weekend, he's now saying, maybe I'll do a third term. Remember? Right. So many of the people came here and said, never, never, never. All of these Democrats and liberals are overthinking it. They're worried. They don't understand. He's never going to do a third term. He's never going to really do tariffs. And here we are in this place where he's talking openly about both.
I don't know how he could possibly have a third term. The 22nd Amendment.
I'll tell you how he'd have to have it. He'd have to be the most popular president in history, which means a lot of things would be going unbelievably well 3 years from now to get 75% to overturn the 22nd Amendment.
75% of every voter in every state.
It could never happen. But if it did, be happy because we'll be doing so well.
Maybe. All I'm saying is he said relatively explicitly, as did most of the people who were supporting him, don't worry about that. That's not on the table. It's never going to be on the table. It's not happening.
He said it that way. First he started, it sounded like a joke that he was doing it just to tweak the left. Now it sounds like he's... I think he's still tweaking.
But my point is he wasn't during the election period when he was talking to the American public.
Said, I'm not going to do it.
Oh, I think we can go back and find some times where he said he wasn't going to do it.
I think
and then he would occasionally...
saying, but no one took... Maybe you thought he was only kidding, but...
by the way, I never thought he was kidding.
No, he's still only kidding.
I've always been of the view
you think he's a dictator and he's going to get rid of the Constitution. I hear that stuff all the time.
No, I didn't say that. But I think that there are legitimate things going on in the past week or two where you have to say to yourself, this is not what I think some people signed up for.
Wait a second. The past week or two, you've been saying that since November 8th, Andrew. And actually, since 2016. Okay. So it's good to have you back. We're going to keep everyone honest. We're going to be looking at everything. When I thought about it, what I thought was to have any chance of even people wanting you to run when you're 83 or whatever the hell he's going to be by then, we'd have to have the greatest country in the world for there to be clamoring for him to run for a third term.
Kristen Welker asked some
good follow-up questions. You can't do it.
She asked
it's not going to happen.
Welker's asking him, and he's not saying, no, I'm not going to do this. He's saying, you know what? Yeah, maybe Vance will run Vance and he'll give me the presidency back.
What if there was a ground? Oh, no. What if there's a groundswell?
Did you see that?
Third term.
I did.
I've seen. By the way, that's not a groundswell. That's something totally different, and the president's talking about it openly.
You'd have to elect Vance.
You'd have to elect Vance.
Okay, and if he says
turn around and say that he's handing the baton to somebody else.
It's all. I think it's all just to generate this. I do. I think it's to generate this. Look, he could have.
But you said that about the tariffs.
No, I didn't. I didn't say anything about. I don't know what the tariffs are going to be. I don't say anything. I say what other people say. I don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs. But if you really want to spend your time gnashing your teeth and pulling your hair that there's going to be a third term like Vladimir Putin, I just don't really think that's it. He's not popular enough right now, probably, to get the 22nd Amendment overturned, right?
No, his approval ratings are high relative to
where he was. They're still below 50%.
But they're still below 50%, so there are still more people who have a negative.
That's why, if you want to look at it positively, the country would have to be doing so well for us to be clamoring for him. And that should be something you want.
You have to believe that Congress doesn't feel that they're somehow under his thumb and that his popularity, right? That's the whole thing.
Congress can't do it alone.
Well, Congress couldn't do it alone. You'd need the public to do it.
Right.
And there's no law firm that's going to sue now because they can't. So we're just in a different place. We're just in a different place.
I really don't think we're in a different place. I think you just need to calm down. You're going to be bald. Seriously. Your hair.
I'm holding on tight.
Your hair is going to be on fire every day. You can't. You got to pace yourself. You definitely got to pace yourself. Okay, you didn't give out the $5,000. I mean, think of all the things you've been worried about just in the last couple of months. I got a list of them.
Okay, good. You hold on to the list. Hold on to the list.
Apple's asked me to buy more memory for this list. But you know what I did?
What'd you do?
I shifted over to the hair on fire for Biden, and it was empty. So I have all this memory.
I don't know why you're living in the past. Why are you living in the past?
I got so much memory on that.
You're so living in the past. Live in the present.
Waiting
Live in the
to join
future.
us.
Tease will be next.
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, Makan Delrahim was the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust in the first Trump administration. He weighs in on the unique back and forth between the president and America's white shoe law firms. And will an efficiency rethink lead to changes in how we manage big business competition?
My favorite one has always been moving the antitrust functions of the FTC into the Justice Department.
Do you think that's in the offing?
I wouldn't be shocked.
This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin, along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick, and we got a big morning for you. Look now at President Trump's antitrust agenda. Joining us in an exclusive interview is Makan Delrahim. He's the former U.S. Assistant Attorney General of the Antitrust Division in the first Trump administration. He's also a partner at Latham & Watkins, and there is so much to talk about as people try to make sense of what's happening here. We obviously have tariffs coming in hot. We'll see, hot or cold, on Wednesday. But I'm curious, before we even get into it, what you're seeing in terms of M&A pipeline, what people are really talking about, because there was this expectation we were going to have a lot of deal volume. The deal volume has not really materialized yet, I think in large part because of the tariff story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think what we're seeing is we've never been busier as far as the people contemplating transactions, both strategic and private equity. But people are starting to take a look, the type of exuberance that they had back in November. Folks were coming in with ideas of, the first and the second and a three-party market trying to merge because they thought there was going to be some kind of a holiday on antitrust. And I think the signals that are being sent by both Chairman Ferguson and Gail Slater at the Justice Department is that, no, the antitrust laws will still be enforced, and in fact will be enforced pretty vigorously.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, do you think it's going to be, how enforced do you think they're going to be, and how aggressive do you think some of these agencies are going to be? You even look at an FCC, for example, and, some of the letters they've been sending some of the media companies in the past couple of weeks around DEI programs and wokeism and other things. And I think there's some question mark about whether certain types of deals can be done at all.
There's certainly a handful of transactions being caught up in various regulatory stages. I think what you're going to see is an easier process than, let's say, the last 4 years with respect to transactions that could be fixed. So these are ones where you can have a divestiture or remedy. My friend Jonathan Cantor, took the position that he wasn't going to do any remedies until, there's a handful of them that were imposed on them by courts. But they wanted to challenge, they wanted to litigate, and they had a pretty good track record for the handful of transactions.
What is the impact going to be of what Doge and Elon Musk are doing on the DOJ and antitrust? And the reason I ask is they're closing effectively field offices and other things and moving some of the functions and the like. That may make it more efficient, but also may make it harder to get some of these things through, or even just to get people's attention?
I think so. So there was this memo from the Deputy Attorney General that went to the division and to all the sections of the Justice Department asking for their input. There's been a lot of panic about some offices being closed and some functions being consolidated. And I think we're in the early stages. I wouldn't count on all the changes occurring. I think it's a listening tour more or less. But look, there's going to be some reorganization that needs to happen. My favorite one has always been moving the antitrust functions of the FTC into the Justice Department.
Do you think that's in the offing?
I wouldn't be shocked if that's something that happens. I mean, it only makes sense, right? CFPB doesn't need to be in the Fed. It could perfectly fit within the FTC's Consumer Protection Bureau or the Treasury Department. You don't need two federal antitrust agencies. All you need is one. The FTC can do a lot more efficiently. I think, just as mergers have a lot of synergies in the private sector, you can have them in the government.
Maybe it would be good for business from that perspective to not have to worry about two different places coming after you or two different sets of rules that were being laid out.
Well, two different sets of rules, two different legal standards. I mean, I get asked on different transactions where we have to go to boards to say, okay, which agency is going to review this? It's like, I don't know. Yeah. There's only a handful that by statute goes to some of them, but some of them they get into a wrestling match between the two agencies. And they eat up a lot of the time for the merger review by going there. And then you have a completely different process at the FTC than you have at DOJ. It makes no sense. There's legislation introduced in both the Senate and the House on that.
What do you make of the larger debate that's happened even over the last week or two now in the world that you inhabit, which is the legal world of law firms? And I'm thinking of Paul Weiss and Skadden, which are settling effectively with the administration, and other law firms like Wilmer Hale and Jenner and others that have gone to court and actually won against this administration, and how you personally sort of look at all of this, because I think there's a major question. I was just looking at a letter that was written to by a lot of these professors at Harvard who seem to be, out of sorts about law firms like this effectively settling over some of their programs at their firms.
Look, that's a really hot topic right now for firms and everybody involved around that. There's no question that some firms use their prestige and their brand to actually become a subsidiary of the DNC, and they didn't take on representation of conservative causes and others. Fortunately, that hasn't been our experience at Latham. We did work for conservative causes. And so that's something that is a hot topic that we'll see how it all shakes out.
But what do you think? How do you think it's going to shake out? Because I know there are clients that I've talked to in the past week, even when I was in Japan on vacation, who were suggesting, look, Paul Weiss is settling with the government, Skadden's settling with the government. If you had a case that you had to bring against this government and this administration, and you actually needed to go with the case, not try to settle the case with the government, but you actually needed to bring the case, you would actually not use Paul Weiss in the end. You would not use a Skadden Arps anymore, because clearly they would say they're trying to placate this administration. And if you were a client that needed to fight this administration, that's not where you want to be.
I think everybody has to take a look at the practices internally. I think some of these have been focused on, some of the DEI initiatives. But I think, we will see how it all shakes out over time.
Do you think it was meritless? Or do you think that there was cause to go after it? You seem to indicate that some of these law firms acted as an arm of the DNC. So that would mean it's not meritless. And you don't just think it's just a witch hunt and retribution train or whatever.
It's, I think there's, some cause.
The ones that
for that
we just were talking about?
Well, let me ask you this, though. I mean, let's put it in this context. So Jones Day has done a lot of work for Republicans. A lot of work for conservatives.
And what was the
okay? And nobody attacked.
Was that a yeah?
And nobody went after Jones Day. And one of the reasons why, because
no, I didn't say
the
why.
question though is whether the administration should be going after private law firms and whether it has a chilling effect ultimately on lawyers and their ability and willingness effectively to take on difficult cases. Because part of what we talked about forever is that everybody deserves good and fair representation. Everybody deserves that. Even somebody who we think is completely guilty and terrible deserves that. And if you get into a position where you feel like, if you're a lawyer, that this administration is going to somehow go after your law firm for representing somebody that they don't like, or they don't like the position or the politics of it, that is an issue, no?
Look, everybody deserves that. That's what we all learn in law school. But there was a period where I think a lot of my friends in the Trump administration who couldn't get representation out there 4 years ago. And I think...
And hold on, can I ask this question? They couldn't get representation because there was a view that that Democratic administrations were going to undermine and upend the business practices of those law firms? Because I had never heard that before, if that's what you're suggesting.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a lot of them, and there were many who wouldn't get hired in some law firms. And these are brilliant lawyers.
No, but what I'm asking is they wouldn't get hired because there was a view that the administration was going to somehow attack the business practice of that law firm, or was it that their views didn't match, for whatever reason, the views of the law firm? If you say that they're more liberally oriented,
more the latter, I'd say.
Okay, but that's different. That's a fundamental difference.
And also firm clients. There were some
absolutely
that demanded certain things.
Right.
But again, I think everybody deserves representation and conservative causes.
Do you think
as well.
the firms that are settling are just at this point saying I'm selling without admitting guilt. I mean, that's what we're implying here, is that there was there's no there. There's no, where there's smoke, there's usually fire. I'm sure that there's a good cause to go after some of
I don't know. I just don't know about the facts.
But do you think they're just saying, okay, these guys are coming after me, I'm going to settle so that I don't get in more trouble with the Trump administration?
I think some are taking a deep look at their practices, whether it has been their hiring or their representation, and taking a look at that.
You got to come on back, because we still have to talk about China and BlackRock and Panama Canals and so many other things. So please come on back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you.
Next on Squawk Pod, the FDA's top vaccine official has resigned, citing what he called, quote, misinformation and lies from HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In focus, the measles outbreak across more than a dozen states in the U.S. Former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb on how we got here.
I think people identify with these anti-vax sentiments based on their political persuasions. I think a lot of these views have hardened. They've become more hardened coming out of COVID. And I think the mandates had a big part of that. So I think it's going to be generational.
That and much more coming right up on Squawk Pod. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Here's Becky Quick.
The FDA's top vaccine official, Dr. Peter Marks, has announced his resignation from the agency. In his departure letter, he underscored the importance of vaccinations, particularly for measles, and referenced what he called misinformation and lies of HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Check out the vaccine stocks today. You can see they're down across the board, but then again, so's the broader market. However, Moderna shares are off by about 12.4%. Joining us right now is former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's also a CNBC contributor and on the boards of both Illumina and Pfizer. And Dr. Gottlieb, walk us through how you read this.
Well, look, I have no reason to believe that the public reporting about the circumstances related to his departure is wrong. And a lot of that reporting related to perceived grievances that Secretary Kennedy had over the vaccine approval process and that division at FDA, and a desire on his part to try to get new leadership in there that he'd be able to influence. And that's what the press reported. I think for a lot of people who work in the innovation
Dr. Marks
space...
being asked to leave, basically. Told he can either resign or be fired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was the reporting over the weekend. I think for a lot of people who work in the innovation space, equally profound to Peter Marks' contributions on vaccine approvals and the renaissance that we've seen in new vaccines over the last really 2 decades was his impact on cell and gene therapy. He presided over the modern creation of that field, presided over the first approval of a gene therapy for an inherited form of blindness, a drug called Luxturna, which was approved when I was at FDA. It presided over the approval of Casgevy, the first CRISPR-based therapeutic for sickle cell disease. He presided over the approval of Kymriah, a drug that was approved about 3 months after I got to FDA for the treatment of a pediatric form of leukemia. It is a cure for many patients and was the first gene therapy approved in the United States. I remember briefing President Trump about that impending approval and how enthused he was that the first gene therapy product was going to be approved on his watch. Peter really presided over the creation of the modern framework for the approval of those products. There's many more in the pipeline. There's about 2,000 cell and gene therapies in the pipeline right now. About 300 are in phase 1 clinical trials, about 35 in phase 3 clinical trials. So these are in advanced stages of development. And I think for a lot of innovators, they knew that Peter was working on a lot of policies that were going to help expedite these products to the market and make the process for development far more efficient. I think for a lot of innovators today, they're very worried about what the status is of that review program at FDA now that Peter has left. And there's going to be a lot of departures behind Peter. There'll be other people leaving that division and that center this week, and those announcements are going to be forthcoming.
Is that something that you think RFK Jr. is targeting as well, or you just think that that is incidental, damage along the way that comes with this?
Yeah, no, it's a casualty. I'm not even sure how aware he is of the full scope of the authority that Peter exercised inside FDA. He also oversaw the entire regulation of the blood industry in the United States. And so FDA does over 100 inspections of blood facilities in the United States. Peter had just presided over new regulations that got implemented on blood donations, allowing veterans to donate blood for who had served in Europe for the first time in a very long time because of prior prohibitions on that. So he also oversaw that portfolio as well. So it wasn't just vaccines. I suspect Senator Kennedy is entirely focused on the vaccine portion of that portfolio, but it has a much broader scope than that and touches a lot of lives.
When it comes to vaccines, what is your general feeling about where we're headed on this front? Measles, I didn't realize, is now in something like 27 states.
That's right. We have, I think, 23 cases now in Kansas, 11 in Ohio. I think it's in, 23 states that you mentioned. I think the scope of the outbreak is much larger in West Texas than what's being reported. There's perhaps thousands of cases there. And I think we're going to have potentially an acceleration this week. We'll have to see what happens in this week in states like Kansas and Ohio, whether those measles outbreaks get under control, they tip, and we start to see many more cases accelerate in those states as well, and see a similar situation to what we're seeing in West Texas. The WHO put out a warning over the weekend giving ex-U.S. travelers a travel advisory about coming into the United States, and this may well be the year that we lose our measles elimination status. We have to get this outbreak under control within the next 10 months or so to make sure we don't lose our measles elimination status, which could have some profound impacts on advisories related to travel to the United States. I don't think we're headed into a good place. Look, the one piece of objective evidence that we have from Secretary Kennedy's tenure was he took down a front-facing campaign to try to get people vaccinated, to try to encourage people to get vaccinated for the flu in the setting of the worst flu outbreak probably in 20 years. And so he has been very focused on dismantling components of the vaccine enterprise in this country. Peter isn't just the only casualty of that. He's canceled grants, he's canceled educational campaigns, he's canceled studies into new vaccines, he's canceled studies into vaccine hesitancy, he canceled the FDA AdCom that did the strain selection for the new flu vaccine for next season. So he's been very focused on this even early into his tenure. Really what's defined his first month in office or 2 months in office has been his advocacy on trying to take down different components of the vaccine enterprise. And so I would expect that focus to continue.
Secretary Kennedy says that he's not interested in dismantling the vaccination programs, but that he wants to look into issues surrounding it and make sure that he's seeing the real truth. Do you believe him?
Well, look, he appointed, or there's been reports in the Washington Post and separately in the New York Times that he appointed two people who are being called vaccine skeptics by the New York Times and the Washington Post to look into the purported link between the MMR vaccine in particular and autism, something that's been thoroughly studied in the past and has been debunked by some very large and rigorous outcome studies. These individuals who he's appointed, one of them has been associated with an effort to use Lupron, the drug Lupron, as a treatment for autism, for some purported link between allegedly vaccines and autism. That's effectively chemical castration. What you're doing is suppressing testosterone in children. And this was the individual who seems to have been, based on the public reporting in the Washington Post and New York Times, appointed or brought in to conduct that vaccine study. So, he's bringing in people, I think, who have a similar point of view. Now, what he would argue is the only way to fully debunk the link that he believes exists between MMR vaccine and autism is to bring in people who believe in that link. And then he would say if they can't prove it, then it must not be true. And so that seems to be what he's doing. I think this is going to cast a cloud over things for a prolonged period of time and create a lot of uncertainty by continuing to perpetuate these things, even after we've studied them really thoroughly over many years.
Scott, looking at where we've come, I did see some news reports over the weekend that there's some clamoring in some areas where people are trying to get vaccines, particularly for the young children for measles. I guess when you see the disease, maybe it changes your mind to some perspective.
Yeah, you see some compensatory behavior. There's no question about that. Vaccination rates will go up in some of these communities as a result of the measles outbreak that we're seeing around the country right now. And we'll see how distributed that gets. I think it's going to get worse before it starts to get better. But some of these things are politically ingrained right now. I think people identify with these anti-vax sentiments based on their political persuasions. I think a lot of these views have hardened. They've become more hardened coming out of COVID. And I think the mandates had a big part of that. So I think it's going to be generational. I think this is going to be very hard to unwash in this country right now. And we're going to see vaccination rates continue to decline before they start to potentially accelerate again. And certainly, Secretary Kennedy's advocacy for a lot of these positions and the steps that he's taken which not only disrupt the vaccine enterprise in this country, but I think continue to create a cloud over them. I think that's going to continue to have some downward pressure on people's willingness to go out and get vaccinated.
Dr. Gottlieb, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
On Friday, President Trump commuted the criminal fraud sentence of Ozy Media founder Carlos Watson. Now, Watson's media startup falsely claimed to have deals with Google and Oprah Winfrey. He was convicted last July of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He was set to report to federal prison on Friday to serve a 10-year sentence before receiving word of Trump's clemency. There were allegations that he was lying to Goldman Sachs at certain points along the way, lying into the advertisements.
Do you remember that phone call?
I remember the phone call where apparently he had changed his voice and he pretended to be somebody else.
Yeah. And
I don't know what
he'd advertise in the New York Times and then say, or whatever newspaper, and then say,
The New York Times.
The New York Times said, yeah.
But I will just say, I don't understand this one.
Oh, what's the real story? What's the real, why?
This one I don't understand. I don't understand the Trevor Milton story on Nicola.
Right.
Except to see, by the way, and I really think it undermines the whole sort of credibility of the legal system. I don't know if you saw, not only was he a big donor in this last campaign to the president, I think to the tune of $1.6 million.
The Nicola guy?
The Nicola guy. In addition to that, his lawyer was Pam Bondi's brother. And so if you're paying a modicum of attention to all of this, at a minimum, whether it's right or wrong, it raises this question about what's going on in this system. And I think there's a lot of people who are sitting around going, is fraud legal, right? I mean, that's the question.
You have no idea about how you feel about the Biden pardons at the end of his term?
You are always living in the past, my friend.
No, but look,
we have a president.
Pointing out hypocrisy is not whataboutism. No. You didn't say a word about the Biden pardon.
First of all, that's not true. I didn't like the Biden pardons, and I did say that at the time. But
I don't remember that.
But there's a secondary component to this, which is if you care about the credibility of the markets.
I just don't know how you can say it and then just. It's just staggering.
I just don't understand how everything.
The whole world started.
How we can.
The whole world started on November. Started on November 8th. The whole world started for you on November 8th.
The whole world has started when Biden was in office, and then everything is related.
If you're going to talk about how the whole system is really bad,
these are
able to preemptively pardon.
Presidential pardons have been pretty lousy.
Oh, you're going to fact check me?
No, presidential pardons have been lousy. If you look at Mark Rich,
I know. So this is nothing new.
I
just want you to say, this is bad, but wow, look at what just happened with Biden.
Presidential pardons.
Look what just happened with Biden. Preemptively pardoning his entire family. Preemptively.
I don't love presidential pardons as a rule. Okay. As a rule, I don't love presidential pardons.
I think they should get rid of it.
I didn't think the Mark Rich pardon was a great pardon.
Okay, I don't think any of the
There's a lot of pardons I don't think that are great. I think that unfortunately it raises real credibility questions about whether there's sort of an authoritarian thing going on.
And that is Squawk Pod for today, this last day of March 2025. See you in April. Squawk Box is hosted by our happy hosting family, Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin, all back together. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern. Get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great Monday. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.